Hello and welcome to the Barcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr, coming to you on a sunny Wednesday afternoon here in New York. We are diving into the social three today, whose keyword is prestige. And as you maybe know, I've used ChatGPT throughout this translation. It's been super helpful for the most part. And then at some times, just the translation functionality really falls off a cliff. It's like my translator has a substance abuse problem and is sometimes great and then sometimes shows up to work just completely hammered and out of it. And so that was one of the cases here. So it took me a long time to translate this, and there's still maybe some issues as we go through it. So here's Naranjo's introduction to the social three. For the distinctive passion of the social three, Ichaso proposed the term prestige. We can say that the social three is someone who has a passion for shining, not only through work, but also in how they present themselves to others. It is as if they have an internal public relations department. By elevating the drive for prestige, understood as a passion for social recognition, to a need for universal applause rather than selective approval, they expend excessive energy, which naturally interferes with spontaneous action. None of the three subtypes are described in the DSM-4, which likely reflects the fact that their characteristics, focused on high performance, practicality, and success, are idealized in modern culture. In fact, it can be said that the social three in particular has become the dominant personality type of the secular and technocratic world. The social three is the most chameleonic of the three subtypes. It is also the most vain of the vain. Compared to the other threes, this subtype exhibits a strong and reactive character with a love for power, even if they do not manage it directly, but rather through the people they support. So that's the introduction to the three. And here's the transformation by Eustaquio Garcia Valles. Never seen that name. Eustachian? I'm not sure. Some Latin name, no? If, as Claudio Naranjo says, the journey that transforms us is not so much an ascent, but rather a movement forward and downward, then the process for the social three involves going beyond external appearances and beyond the evaluation of others in order to see what has been hidden, what has been denied and negatively valued in ourselves, and what has been identified as foreign to our ideal self. So we're very firmly in the language of the false self here, as you remember from the introduction to the three, Winnicott's idea of true self versus false self. And here, Garcia Valles is adding, what has been denied and negatively valued in ourselves. So sometimes we talk about the shadow self. And then also what has been identified as foreign, that sometimes is like the not self. So they're slightly different concepts, right? The shadow self is like what's socially unacceptable, but kind of deeply felt in some ways, or some part of myself that I've kind of had to put in the closet, as it were. Identified to foreign is more like you might admire this in someone else, and it might be a quality that's socially acceptable or even desirable, but you just sort of say, that's not me. A lot of us are like that with artists, right? Oh, they're so talented that I can never do that. So that's sort of the not self as opposed to the shadow self. We wouldn't say like an artist represents our shadow necessarily in that context. So threes are going to have to work through a lot of that partitioning of self that's happened already for them. The transformation process often begins with dissatisfaction over what has been achieved, which keeps us feeling lost, internally disconnected, and in a crisis of life purpose. Sort of the stereotypical arc for the three is they achieve so much, and then they look around and say, well, why do I still feel incomplete or not any better? Through personal work we begin searching for and reclaiming what has been rejected. We learn that what we uncover is ours and for us, rather than another achievement to showcase to the world. We must walk into uncertainty, which means getting lost in order to embrace change, inhabiting a disorder, born from a dose of madness, to recognize the most authentic parts of ourselves. It also involves expressing what we are not and what we do not know, thus opening up an inner space that is increasingly broader and freer. Eventually, what we discover and value as our own also starts to lose weight, leading to a gentler and less demanding relationship with ourselves. This allows us to connect with trust and awareness of what is new, letting ourselves be, letting ourselves perceive what arrives, what life brings us. Such an interesting point, bringing in the shadow self or the not self, these parts of us that we've rejected or ignored. It's not just that we get to discover these parts of ourselves, but we also bring balance to, we balance out the role of the ideal self. Like without those other pieces, our ideal self, our image, our false self is so important. But when you bring in these other pieces, what Garcia Valles is saying here is we get gentler, right? With the need for conventional success, as an example. Our personality before the journey. The original scene, at least the one in which one remembers how the trait was fixed, the moment when the distress of the abandoned child found an escape route, is marked in the social three by the experience of the gaze, a gaze that returns us to a lost paradise, to a state of well-being, but which, from that moment on, falsifies us forever. Something had to be found to show, something that would give me a place, something that would satisfy my parents, so that I could receive a kind of support in the form of their gaze, not for who I was, but for what I showed. Some testimonies express it very clearly. Look at how smart my little girl is. She's already reading and she's only 3, they would say. And I, clinging to my mother's skirt without an arm to hold me, became her shoulder to cry on and would say, "Come on, Mama, don't cry." Another account, "But you can't imagine how well my little girl folds clothes," my mother would say. When I was 5 or 6, they asked me, "And you, little girl, what will you be when you grow up?" We lived in a humble home, and I was spinning on the carousel in the park, everything turning and turning in a lullaby of metal. And suddenly I answered, "I'm going to make money to fix this house, make it beautiful, and buy a refrigerator. When I grow up, I'm going to be successful." And in that moment, when I felt that would be the case, I felt at peace. And another quote, "As a child, they showed me off like a trophy. Look how beautiful my boy is with his blonde hair. He looks like an angel." So before we go further, this is sort of the typical account of the 3, that with one of the caregivers, there was a feeling of contingent love not unconditionally or just because I exist, but love that's conditional based on what I do. And here you can see that sort of effect being described by these childhood stories of how smart he is, how beautiful she is. She's going to grow up and be somebody when she grows up, that kind of thing. And it's hard, right? Because it doesn't sound exactly like child abuse, but we can also appreciate how painful that message is if a child determines for themselves that they have to perform in order to be loved. That threat of abandonment and of being discarded. It's not just abandonment, it's also this feeling of manipulation, of being used. It's very core to the feeling triad. Before consciously beginning the process of transformation, social threes have their eyes fixed on achieving social success. This is their motor, the pursuit of a prestigious social position in the environment they move in, a space where they can shine, be admired, and where they almost always succeed. We easily create a network of people whose primary function is to admire us: friends, teachers, bosses, students, patients. We want to be the center of attention and of the gaze of those we admire, and we deploy all our seductive abilities to achieve it. These abilities vary depending on what has been reinforced in a biography. Some show intelligence, culture, and class. We flaunt that we know and the degrees, we flaunt what we know and the degrees we have. Others emphasize material symbols of social status: a beautiful home, an eye-catching car, expensive clothes, luxury watches. Others focus on their body and face, being attractive, knowing how to dance. Through all of this, we receive a gaze of recognition, but not for us. Instead, it is for the persona we have maintained for years with great effort and a deep sense of emptiness. We know how to sell ourselves, how to draw attention, adapting skillfully to whatever context we are in. But internally, we remain lost. In the midst of so many roles, we do not know what we feel or who we really are. So this idea of the gaze, I think, is so important to the three and to the feeling triad in general. It's interesting. I remember when Penelope was first born, I was so changed by the importance her face took on for me. And like when I would close her eyes, I could see her face like a huge moon in front of me. So it was really almost oppressive, this gaze coming from her. And I wondered and still wonder if that wasn't in part kind of a phantom memory or a trace of my own infancy, and how the face of my caregiver, the face of my mother, was so dominant and foregrounded. And so this gaze, I think twos, threes, and fours are preoccupied with the gaze and what information we're getting from it. So the gaze is really key. And what the three does most completely and most sort of fatally from a spiritual perspective is they become expert at manipulating the gaze such that it is favorable, and then they merge fully with I am the one who produces that gaze. So if we're being really kind of deliberate with this mirror analogy with vanity, what comes first is the image. What comes first is the reflection, and the reflection is the gaze of the caregiver. And then from that, projected back onto the world is the I, is the I am that. I am that which produces this gaze. And so it's mutually manipulative from the get-go, manipulative of the other because I will become an expert at eliciting that gaze, and self-manipulative because I am that which does that. Okay. So this gaze, internally we remain lost, so many roles, we do not know what we feel or who we really are. Quote, I was not authentic. What I believed were my feelings, my emotions were not real. And I wanted to be authentic, but I could not achieve it. I wanted to tell the truth and did not know what my truth was. This is very distressing, asking myself what I feel and not knowing, or what I think, what I want, and seeing that I do not know that either. This in contrast with a personality that appears very structured, seemingly very clear, in which I do know what I want, I do it, and I impose it. For many years, I believed that I always knew what I wanted. This was my delusion. That's such a great articulation, and we can use it as a springboard to contrast with the 2 and the 4. The 3 believes that they know what they want. They actually think that they know what they want. The 2 is more in contact with not knowing what they want, but that's okay because of how important relationships are to them. That to some extent they believe in love, they believe in relationship, and that gives them an escape route, as it were, from addressing the core challenge of the feeling triad, which is, what do you want? What do you want on your own terms? So they get to escape it because they say relationships are the most important. Family is the most important. Love is the most important. And so what I want is, at its core, interdependent and relational. So they kind of get an out that way. 4s get another out, which is they know they don't know what they want. And so they're seekers, and they're on a hunt for the authentic, for the real thing, getting outside of story. Gosh, I know that everyone just is wearing masks and masks on top of masks, and I'm going to keep peeling away until the real core is there. That's sort of the energy of the 4. And the 3 is like, no, I know what I want, and yet doesn't. Adapting to each environment stiffens us, cools us, and freezes us. However, we believe we are always fine. We simply function in the world and function well, with efficiency, impatience, responsibility, and competition, competitiveness, without realizing what is happening inside. To fill the void, we reinforce our blindness in doing. We always try to stay busy, refusing to stop so as not to become aware of how lost we are. We can turn into machines of work and production with a demanding and sometimes authoritarian attitude, but dressed in friendliness and good humor, where the other person is not seen as a person but as an instrument for our objective. As Montaigne points out, we rarely do anything for someone. Rather, we only do something for them while we are doing something else. We rarely do anything just for somebody else. We only do it for them while we're doing something else. When we gain admiration in work, we expand. The more people approve of me and applaud me, the more I expand, the more I dominate, and the more I control. Here, our madness is revealed. We seek to feel sustained by people through admiration and applause. Admiration is the foundation that supports us and distances us from the experience of that small child who feels sad, alone, and abandoned. The feared scene is being worthless, not having money, being poor, or not succeeding in our profession. That scene brings us into contact with abandonment and pain. Therefore, we can collapse at the possibility of feeling questioned. The reaction is to freeze and wait. What hurts us is not shown. It is repaid coldly with distance and indifference through a sly revenge with no awareness of the pain. I want to take a quick time out because as we're talking about this expansion, it's true. The three does get off on success. Unlike, let's say, another type, the 3 does feel gratification for succeeding, which makes their transformation work even harder. But that expansion is short-lived, right, as we've seen, or maybe not short-lived, it just doesn't touch them. But because of the 3's distance from their quote-unquote true self, that it doesn't touch them isn't so obvious. And that's what makes it such a hard type, because they do feel better when they get, let's say, promoted or buy a new car or, whatever. And I don't want to just make it about, like, I don't want to be, having a successful family, having a beautiful family, right? Like, let's not be dismissive about these worldly successes. For some types, nothing is more important than that. So, not just for some types, I mean, for some people. So what is so hard about this? What's hard about it is, the question is the 3 really being touched? And the possibility that the answer is no is so scary that few people can do that kind of work, right? Because, gosh, we just have the best family and we have this beautiful home and we've got a great community, expanding, getting bigger. But someone really could have all those things and be deeply touched by it. But the unhealthy 3 is they're confusing their expansion with their being. They're puffed up, but they're not fed. And I want to quickly look at the character and let's look at character and neurosis. At the end, he has this great. Well, before I look at his, I want to talk about the 3 versus the 8. So I've seen these types get mixed up before. And when we were talking about expansion, it made me think of it. So, particularly for, let's say, a social 3 now. The way I would suggest that a 3 and 8 are going to be differentiated. So one is, the intensity of the 8 is going to be more foregrounded. The 8 is so intense that, for instance, many people will experience the 8 as too much. And for 3, that would be bad strategy. So a 3 will only be too much if they can also demonstrate it in their success. So I don't know Steve Jobs' type, but like Steve Jobs is not an 8. Even if he were to have aggressive moments, they would sort of be in his body, they would be in service of progress. He seems like a 3 to me, or 3, 4. A political person getting things done in Congress, if they're doing it for their power, if they're Kevin Spacey or whatever, that lust for power, that's 8 energy. But if they're doing it because they have a dream of forward progress, that's 3 energy. So is lust in service of progress, or is progress in service of lust, would be one way of checking the difference. And that would be easy to see from the outside, just how you experience the person. If they're invasive in your space, that's 8 energy. If they're not, that's 3 energy. 3s are very good at intuitively kind of working with the feelings that somebody has, and are less likely to sort of transgress them. They might discard them, but they'll know them. The 8 won't necessarily be in contact. What else might we say about the 3 and the 8? I mean, I think the other thing that's maybe said of 3s, that it's not a nice thing, it's not a very nice thing to say, but I think it is true, which is that, like, I think because of how universal 3ness is, we can all kind of sniff out when a 3 is being political. Let's say, like, we all know somebody who's greasing the wheels, making things work. I remember, like, when I was a product manager and young and hungry, one of the engineering managers said, like, I see that you're very ambitious. Like, he almost knew that I was ambitious more than I did. But you could kind of see that I was like someone who wanted to make things happen. The 8, there's more innocence, to use an 8 word. There's more innocence to the 8. There's more of a primitive, like, amoral, like, I want it, therefore I take it energy for the 8. And so the 8 isn't going to alert our, like, bullshit detectors compared to the 3. Let's see what Naranjo says. These can occasionally be confused in that the 3 individual may be aware of having developed self-assertive competitiveness in a vindictive manner, and may be both dominant as well as competitive. The main difference, as in the distinction between the 3 and the 7, is the impulsiveness and rebelliousness of the 8, in contrast to the typical self-control and conformity of the 3. Okay, I think that's along the same lines. Let's carry on. Awareness of the process, what arises as new. Que surge. What surges? I think what arises is fine. Where are you going to get lost? We are lost without recognizing what we truly feel. We cling to superficiality, to what is visible and socially valued, looking to others, to their approval, to convention, constantly adapting to external circumstances. We act and express only what we consider correct and appropriate, taking it as certainty, thereby fleeing from our wound. In the process of falling, what emerges is a profound pain, a great pain upon seeing the lack of connection, which has been occupied by the desire to please others. It is an unmasked sense of emptiness when we realize that all we see is vanity. A nausea arises upon witnessing how vain our actions are, how useless they are, how superficial we are. We seek impressive things or situations until we begin to realize that what is truly impressive is that which is not, that which calms us. Thus, the desires that once filled the entire spectrum begin to break apart. I mean, I think that pain being described, that's up there for, like, most difficult pains in the Enneagram. Precisely because of the 3 rising to the heights that the 3 rises, the fall is that much more painful. This lack of connection that that we've been living with for a while. And we can all relate to it. I mean, we can all have these moments of like, oh my gosh, I've kind of been a zombie for the last month, last year, last 10 years, last 20 years. The longer it is, the more sickening it is, because the more threatening it is to like huge swaths of our meaning making in life. So we can all like, this is not just for threes at all, but this is the threes home base. When we discover ourselves, we feel shame for being this way and fear that others will find out, that our well-crafted image will shatter before those who matter to us. What a horror if they find out. I will never be able to get out of this. In the process, the mechanism of modification is immediately activated. Now we strive to conform to what is healthy, to what is right. And suddenly people tell us, you've changed so much. But of course we remain trapped in the same cycle, trying to perfect it and put it to our service. Yeah, I think this, this speaks to my own experience for myself and as a coach, is when you're working with threes, there will be some very difficult challenge and it will sort of threaten their very being. And then so rapidly they turn it into this hero's journey and like weave it into the narrative of their being in a really effective and convincing way. And I think if you want to be friends with the three, you have to slow them down and make sure that they're really feeling threes should always be encouraged to slow down and to stay in the mess and to stay in the mystery and to stay in the not knowing. And there's just layer after layer of performance and, worrying about what people will say, in conventional senses. Gosh, like, I mean, how many people do we talk to? And, how many of us can relate to this, where it's like, if I take a year off, people are going to look at that year and say, what were you doing? And the market's going to change a lot and people are going to get ahead. So a year off, that feels really scary. Financially, I don't know if we can take it, the 6, the 3 and the 6 and the 9, kind of those core numbers combining with each other. Need for success, fear of insecurity. And at the 9, it's hard work. It's kind of like there's a laziness. Okay. We're going off the rails. That's okay. We're almost done here with the whole project. What is truly healthy always involves accepting what I am, what naturally arises from within, acknowledging the lack and inhabiting it rather than covering it up with actions or performance. For us, what is healthy involves recognizing our failure, our falsehood, acknowledging what we present but are not, and then realizing it doesn't kill us, that we can bear it. It also requires confronting our ambition, doing only what we are truly capable of. Our connection with the body is our barometer. We must pay attention to discomfort and our ability to express it, despite the fear of rejection and inadequacy. To show what is incorrect, what is unpleasant, with trust in the spontaneous without being overtaken by emotion in search of a profitable outcome. We're to manage to make this our own, laughter, calm, and peace appear. And it's true, like we mentioned spontaneity throughout. 3 is maybe one of the less spontaneous types. That's another way to contrast the 3 from the 2 and the 4. Is of the 3 feeling triad types, the 3 is less spontaneous. It's almost as if things go through a fairly clunky internal mechanism of, how well does this uphold my image? So there's like a review board kind of in the process of the 3 somehow. So body connection, spontaneity, those are great barometers, as the author is saying here. We heal by setting and accepting boundaries, by saying no when that is what we truly feel, and by recognizing what expands us, such as embracing the everyday, enjoying what is present, a walk, a simple pleasure, that which nurtures us, that which encourages us to engage our capacity for cooperation and connection. Where there was once a need for applause, there now arises a need for a pause. How healthy it is to be able to say, this is for me and I will keep it without external witnesses. The engine of success loses strength. And then, as the third says, not to say that we no longer are interested in ambition, but we punish ourselves less for being this way. I think that's such a great way of putting it. Ambition runs very deep in our systems, but a healthy 3 learns to have a good relationship with their ambition, and knows that it isn't who they are, can turn it off, can apply it selectively, and so on. Experiences of authenticity strengthen us. So, 3 extending its wings to the 4 here. Distances from the feeling of falsehood, from feeling unworthy, which has been based on, I am valuable because I do. In its place arises, I am valuable because I exist. A healing affirmation is, I respect what I feel. Solitude appears not something to be feared, but as a necessity. We no longer flee from emptiness. Emptiness becomes the space where we can be present and observe. We recognize the importance of intimate relationships. Now this is 3 extending into 2. We learn to be someone who needs others and who is needed by others. We learn to share our time. Now we can let go more and do less. Seeing that the other needs affection just as I do makes me softer, less demanding of others and also of myself. But without a doubt, what emerges as new, what opens us up in the process, is an encounter with life, with something greater, with spirituality, with God. It says more about spirituality. Spirituality also reveals itself as the strength to navigate suffering when the only thing present in our lives is a relentless voice saying, this is ego, this is ego, this is ego, until at a certain moment calm arrives. Being lost, doubting, ceases to be something to hide and instead becomes a fundamental part of the process that allows us to find ourselves. What would it be like to reach full development? Here they quote the Delphi, look within yourself, know yourself, etc. Reaching acceptance. In fullness, we would find ourselves before a very free being, before a person who is attentive to themselves, rather than to what is expected of them. Someone who embraces their impulse toward falsehood and, with their ability to bring out the jester within, can move beyond their image and reveal their heart, their struggles, their bad moods, their needs, their pain. As the narcissistic drive diminishes and loses weight, the drive for competition gives way to a need for collaboration. Self-esteem ceases to rely on maternal praise and instead shifts toward recognizing and opening up to the present, feeling joy simply for being here, for living, and for doing the small things in life with greater calm. I think one thing that I see with 3s who are far in their transformation work is 3s are very quick to point out their flaws, to tell sort of these horror stories about themselves. 3s have this great capacity to, as they say with the jester, kind of turn themselves into a lesson. And I think if you're a 3, you have to be careful with that, because you can see how close that is to the return of the self-productizing, right? Oh, wow, I can productize my experiences as a great lesson and succeed on those terms. And so it's just constant for 3, constant. I don't know if it ever really ends, this impulse toward falsehood. But where it does decisively end is when the three can shine a light on their impulse toward falsehood and laugh at it. So that's why I think there is, laughing, this point about the jester, I think, is deep. Not the jester of the seven, who that's their work to do, but the way that a three can make light of these things is a gift that they have. Being with other human beings in a more egalitarian way, listening, sharing, creating beautiful things would also be a consequence of this development. In this way, the social three would move from looking in order to control to looking in order to discover, like a child who, upon looking, discovers sound, space, sense, leaving behind functionality and living for themselves without obsessing over being useful. I'm just going to browse for anything else here that, we haven't touched, but I think we've hit it pretty fully. We are helped when others accompany us in discovering our real needs beyond our idealized self-image. This means connecting with the emotions we have rejected, anger, shame, envy, in order to reach the pain that underlies them, to face it directly in the presence of another person, and to validate ourselves in the process. Finally, we can unmask the ego through real contact with another person, someone who helps us experience silence and recognize what is happening inside us without the need to do anything. And all of this not from a desire to annihilate the ego, but from a more patient, more serene, and more loving encounter with ourselves. It's a great ending, and we will continue with the sexual three next time.